Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Administrator Regan, for sharing your time with us today. Environmental rules and regulations aren't just important for tackling the climate crisis. They're essential for addressing the toxic legacy of environmental racism and injustice. Growing up in the Mon Valley of Western Pennsylvania, I saw firsthand the devastating effects of unchecked pollution. Back then, when I was growing up, I didn't quite have the language or the expertise to explain the science of pollution, but I had my years of experience living in an environment where the air we breathed was harmful. I knew that wherever you were, if you were Black or you were brown or you were poor, you were likely breathing toxic air too. Our country ranks in the top 1% nationwide for cancer risk from air pollution. In my hometown of North Braddock, cancer rates are more than double the rest of the country. Approximately 90% of residents are at risk of exposure to particulate matter. Our childhood asthma rates are nearly 3 times the national average. These statistics aren't just numbers. They represent very real people and very real families and very real communities overburdened by industrial pollution. Administrator Regan, under your leadership, addressing environmental racism and justice has become a core component of the EPA's work, including through the rulemaking process. Can you speak to how the EPA's recently finalized rules, such as the soot rule and the carbon pollution standards, will specifically improve conditions for individuals in overburdened and underserved communities?
Well, absolutely, and thank you for sharing your personal testimony there. There are so many of us that have grown up and lived in areas where we are hit by unchecked pollution, and the way to do this is the way we've done it, which is create a separate office, a National Program Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights that spends time with our national programs that look at air and water issues, to be sure that as we are designing our regulations, we are not leaving any communities behind. And what we've done a great job of is really ensuring that the statistics that you just laid out, statistics in communities all across the country, are infused into the ultimate result of these regulations. Our regulations are not only better for the United States, they're absolutely better for those who have been disproportionately dumped on for decades. Our children now are breathing cleaner air, they're not drinking lead-poisoned water, and they're doing better in school, and they're happier, and they're healthier. And so that's what we've been doing the last 3.5 years, and we're gonna keep doing that.
Thank you. While developing strong environmental regulations is crucial, we know that it's just half of the battle. These regulations are only as effective as they're backed by rigorous enforcement. Across the country, many Black, brown, and poor communities continue to bear the brunt of environmental hazards as their corporate polluters just flout the rules with little consequences. For decades, industry has promoted this myth that pollution is merely an unavoidable price to pay for economic growth. Yet we know that this narrative is just a false choice that primarily serves to shield big polluters from accountability for their chronic environmental harms, ultimately harming both those frontline, fence line communities and the workers. In just the past 2 years alone, one facility in my district has been fined as much as $14 million for hundreds of violations. And unfortunately, we know this company is not an outlier. For corporate polluters all across the country, it's clear that these fines are just a fraction of their massive earnings, and they don't actually serve as a deterrent. It's just a cost of doing business. So Administrator Regan, how is the EPA working to ensure that chronic corporate polluters face real consequences when they consistently dump toxins into our communities?
Well, number one, we have to continue to be vigilant with our enforcement capabilities and not let any of the polluters off the hook. I believe that the polluters should pay. But secondly, as we take a look at these facilities, there's communication with the arms of our office that design regulations that show many of these companies can not only meet these standards, they can go below. So when we design a new regulation, then there are stiffer penalties associated with those newer regulations. So as we ramp down pollution through a regulatory approach, we also give our enforcement teams more authority to hit them a little bit harder.
So what additional enforcement authorities does the EPA need from Congress to address this, the chronic polluters effectively?
Well, you know, I think, listen, we have a very strong enforcement team. I think the only limitations we have is does the fine match the action, which you've laid out? And I think we have some statutory constraints in terms of just how much we can fine a facility. Some of these facilities have very egregious behavior, as you've laid out, but the statutory authority only allows for us to fine them a certain amount. And so if those amounts are raised and are proportionate to the crime, we will do our job and we will hold those polluters accountable.
Thank you, Administrator, for your time. I yield back.
Gentlelady